Our next item is being a green light champion, and hopefully, yeah, I can see Graeme on the screen. So if I can pass over to Graeme, and I think he's got a few colleagues. Laura might be helping him out as well. So welcome.
Yeah, unfortunately, Laura's unable to attend, so which would have made it a much more interesting presentation, I'm sure, than the one I'm going to give. I will try and rattle through this, despite what you've just said, Daryl, just to try and make up a little bit of time. The project that I'm going to describe is basically centered around making services aware of the needs of autistic people in particular, and other forms of learning disabilities. I'm just going to briefly, so bear with me a minute, I'm just going to share a few slides with you. Right, I now unfortunately can't see any of you guys, so I'm kind of a little bit flying in the dark with this. But can you all see that? Okay.
Yeah, we can see it, Graeme. Thank you.
Right. Sorry. But bear me just 2 seconds. Sorry. Can you just let me know whether you can see an individual slide or whether you can see the whole presentation at the moment?
It's the whole presentation at the moment.
Yeah,
Graeme.
that's. Bear me a minute. I'm just going to stop sharing. Again. Sorry, I've not had a great day with technology today. A fairly important bit of it has failed on me.
It's still the main presentation, Graeme, but we can see the slide. Oh, there we go. We're in.
Yeah, we should be in.
Yeah.
Right. So as I say, I work as a support accountant within Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. We're not actually commissioned to deliver much in the way of learning disability provision, but there is quite a close connection statistically between various forms of LD and autism in particular, with other mental health diagnosis. So as part of a response to this, and for various other different reasons, our trust has a specific project known as the Green Light Project. So what I'm briefly going to talk you through today is I'm going to give you a brief overview of what autism is, a brief overview of the aims of the project, a little bit around what best practice actually looks like, some examples of the reasonable adaptations that can be made to help support autistic people and other forms of LD within our services. A little bit around the Green Light Toolkit, which is the method that we use for assessing and measuring our services over time. And the last little bit, most of what I'm going to talk about is probably the natural reaction for corporate services to look at this and say, well, this is clinical, this isn't anything to do with us. And I actually want to explain why I don't think that's right, and why I personally became involved as a Green Light champion within the trust. So autism is a fairly broad spectrum, but over 1% of the UK population have a diagnosis, but the true level is probably far higher. I read recently that the first person internationally to be diagnosed with autism died recently, and he was 89. So medically speaking, this is kind of relatively new stuff. So particularly amongst adults, there will be a lot of people that won't have had the clinical diagnosis. So the actual proportion of the UK population is probably with autism is probably a lot higher than that. Factor into that also autistic people often try to mask their disability, and it's actually very difficult to identify that. So common difficulties that autistic people often face can be some or all or any of the fun. So social communication, social interactions, often autistic people are very non-verbal in their communication. They struggle in social contexts. They like it. There's a tendency to like routine. Often there's oversensitivity to sort of the five senses, and particularly things like light and smell. There can be issues with spatial awareness and issues in dealing with internal feelings, whether that's things like hunger or emotions. There's quite often they get highly focused on specific interests or hobbies to the exclusion of everything else. Quite often they will take things literally, and quite often they will suffer from extreme anxiety, which quite in some cases, but all cases can lead to sort of meltdowns and shutdowns. So as I said, our green light project has a number of aims, and the next two slides basically list all the names. What I've highlighted in red are the ones that I think are probably the most salient and the most relevant for you guys. The Green Light Champions, we're basically a network that works together to share best practice and to develop resources and for service improvement. And that developed resources bit I will come on to further on there, because that's part of the reason why I do feel that this is actually quite relevant to finance functions. Obviously, we're looking to promote inclusivity. We're looking to aid discussion with the group and to offer support and guidance. And again, I will touch on that at the end of the presentation. And we're looking to provide solution-focused work to improve service provision, which to me sounds an awful lot like business partnering. So this being the NHS, we love an acronym, and the one that's quite often quoted for best practice is something called SPELL, and that stands for structure. So that's whether that's the use of visual aids to communicate, whether that's having sort of various routines. For example, if somebody's trying to access a community service, can we give them consistent appointment times so that they begin to get aware and comfortable with the time of day that they're seeing people. So it becomes basically the access to our services becomes normalised for them within their routine. It's about taking a positive approach, and probably the one I would highlight on there is actually the allowed time to climatise, which is not always easy when services are under pressure and we're looking to get people seen and assessed and dealt with. But when we're looking to deal with service users that have a diagnosis of autism, we do need to try and build some time in to allow them to adjust to their surroundings and their situation. Empathy, I think it's really important that you try to keep a sense of calmness and communicate in ways that are supportive of the individual service user. Low arousal, so that's around creating a safe environment where things are decluttered, where the information is clear. And again, coming back to the allowing time to acclimatise, I think allowing time for the service user and their carers to process what's going on. And the last one is links, and again, that's around sharing information with individual family members. So the next slide basically goes through some, but not an exhaustive list of examples of reasonable adjustments. Now, the first one is quite important. It's about making sure that diagnosis of autism or suspected autism are picked up and consistently flagged on medical records. If we get this wrong, and nationally various different trusts within the NHS have got this wrong, it can ultimately end up in a coroner's court. I think the reason that we now nationally have autistic training for all members of staff stems from one event that happened in an acute hospital in the Midlands, where an autistic teenager didn't have the right notes on, woke up from having a fit, and was given inappropriate medication, which then caused a reaction for him that unfortunately led to loss of life. And so I say that one is an absolute fundamental, I think, for everybody. Provision of easy to read documentation. So there's a language that's been developed that uses symbols and pictures rather than words, and that's called Macatron. And we have a service user led expert who spends a lot of time within our trust rewriting service user documentation using Macatron. How can we change our physical environment, particularly for waiting areas where things can be congested, they can be noisy, the lighting might not be good, we might be bombarding people with lots and lots of posters. So what can we do to improve that? Can we make appointments for people at less busy times? So if we know somebody has a diagnosis of autism, can we see them at the start of the day or at the end of the day when waiting rooms, for example, might be a lot less busy and a lot less crowded? Use of communication cards and other forms of symbols. Again, that's kind of addressing non-verbal communication for service users. There's quite a high correlation between deafness and autism. So do we look to have sign language available? When we communicate, can we avoid metaphors so that because what we say will be taken literally, and using metaphors will be confusing to people with autism? Can we do things like familiarization visits? So can we actually bring somebody, if somebody's got an appointment, can we bring them in ahead of time and get them used to the surroundings that they're going to be seen and assessed in? And the use of enabling technologies. So those are just some examples of the things that as trusts we can all do change that. So how do we assess this? Well, we have a toolkit. The toolkit is an annual survey that has 27 questions. It's completed by service users and staff, and the questions are in 3 separate groups that get progressively harder for organisations to achieve. So questions cover things like the physical environment, documentation, care records, staff knowledge, training, and access to resources. And from this, we're able to have a traffic light system to grade the performance of individual services, individual wards, and from that we can start to identify long-term trends and identify areas for improvement. So, as I said, most of what I've described there is fundamentally more targeted at service delivery from clinical services. And as it happens, I think I'm still the only member of the corporate service within the trust who is a green light champion. But I just for this slide, I just want to go through why I personally think that's actually wrong approach, and we need to get more corporate services, especially finance, involved. For a start, some financial services, for example, cash offices, will have direct contact with service users with the diagnosis of autism. You know, so understanding and being aware of these things, being aware of your environment, I think is quite important for those members of staff. Similarly, with most of us at some time will come in contact indirectly with service users, whether that's moving around the sort of clinical sites or whatever. So we may come into contact, and we need to be aware of how to act and how to interact around that. Coming to the more finance specific, knowledge of our green light project doesn't have a standalone cost center. So we have to find funding options, and this is where my role as a support accountant within a management accounts team becomes a little bit more of a business partner. On one of the previous slides, I talked about adaptions of waiting areas, for example. One of my proudest moments working as a green light champion was actually in the approach to the end of last financial year, where I was able to use my knowledge and my contacts within the services to arrange for the provision of non-ticking clocks and various different toolkits for it. That might not have happened given the financial circumstances that 23-24 is on, but my awareness of the processes and the year-end creditor processes and my contacts allowed us to get the orders put through and take the hit in 22-23. And the final point on this, and this is an area that I want to try and develop further, is that the number of budget managers that we as a region deal with, law of averages says that some of them must have learning difficulties, some of them must be autistic. So what do we need to do to adapt our communication when we're working with them? Do we need to look and consider how we adapt, how we do our reports to make things and the last point on there is, do we reschedule budget meetings to take account of social energy? Now, the idea of social energy is that, you know, everybody gets through the day, comes home, you sit down, you have your tea, and you just collapse in front of the TV exhausted because you've had a full day of social interactions. Now, for people with autism, that social energy gets burnt out far quicker, particularly if they've tried to, in inverted commas, normalise their day and their relationships with people. So do we need to maybe prioritise meeting times for budget managers that we know are autistic to take account of things like that? So if anybody's got any questions, in a minute I'll come off the thing, and if anybody's got any questions, I'll quite happily take them. But finally, thank you for indulging me and listening to me. But please remember, when you've met one person with autism, then you've met one person with autism.
Thank you, Graeme. That was really, really informative. I've got a question from Jenny.
Hi, yeah, my son is autistic, so this is very close to my heart, so thank you for everything you're doing. And I was just thinking, when we come into hospitals and doctor surgeries and stuff, often I have to tell them, which was really awkward before he knew he was autistic, which is crazy because when I go through an airport, it's much easier because we have the sunflower lanyard. And
Yeah.
I've never seen that used in an NHS capacity. And I was just wondering whether we already do, and I just don't know, or if we don't, why don't we? And maybe we should.
My wife works in the Estates and Facilities Management team at Barts and the Royal London, and their lanyards, they do have autistic friendly lanyards, which their wards and their services all have. So I think within the NHS, within the wider NHS, it is becoming a little bit more prevalent. But those are the type of sometimes quick wins that can make a difference. But again, it's promote. The whole point of the project is to promote the awareness of it. Even within clinical services, the level of, particularly if a specialist service like a mental health trust service, sometimes you can get a little bit sort of narrowly focused, which is kind of ironic, given that's one of the things that can happen with people with autism.
Yeah, I was just thinking it wouldn't be a cost because we could use the sunflower lanyards that are already used for airports, and then you're just using the same thing all the time. But I don't know who from an NHS top perspective could send something out and maybe just do it across the board.
It's an interesting point, and it's one I'll take to the next Greenlight Champions meeting that I go to, see whether we can kickstart anything.
Thank you for what you do as well.
That's fine.
Yeah, I don't know whether Jason's still on, but it's something we can pick up with him as well, and perhaps he can send that up the line, because it was really thought-provoking. It's a shame we haven't got more time to ask more questions.